everybody. Welcome to the Herbs to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today we're talking about family nutrition. Our guest today is Jennifer House. She's a registered dietitian who focuses on family nutrition, so that is absolutely perfect for our conversation. How are you, Jennifer?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Lauren.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you came on because this is something that I've been wanting to cover in my podcast for a couple of months now, so this is perfect. So, first of all, I imagine that most families aren't getting all the nutrition that they need. What are some of the struggles to getting good nutrition?
That's a good question and a big question. There's lots
Yeah,
of different reasons from, food insecurity, which has only gotten worse over the past few
yeah.
years, to, lack of time or energy to, meal plan or, actually cook and get the food on the table. I know if you're a parent, about 50% of us struggle with having the food there and then the child just not choosing to eat it, right? So picky eaters.
Right.
So, there's lots of different levels to, being able to get adequate nutrition and reasons families struggle with that for sure.
Yeah. So, how can we overcome some of these struggles, especially like the time and the energy?
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. So, I would always encourage, preparing when you have the most time or energy or feel the best, whether that's a certain day of the week, or whether it's a certain time of day, if you feel best in the morning to do a little bit of dinner prep, because by the time, most people get to the end of the day anyways,
Mhm.
right? We just don't have the energy or the capacity to start a meal from scratch. Meal planning can also make a huge difference because there's a lot of mental energy that just goes into that constant thought, what's for dinner throughout our head
Seriously.
all day long if we don't know. So just to get rid of that, mental clutter once a week and sit down and make a plan for the week, according to your schedule, when the kids have activities, things like that will really help. And then there's, a few strategies for meal planning that can help as well. If you have some extra time or some extra help on the weekend, I would always suggest, cooking a big batch of chili or something that you can put, 3 or 4 portions in the freezer to save you a couple nights off during the week. Or making one big batch of chicken, for example, and then just repurposing it throughout the week in chicken fajitas or chicken pasta or chicken soup. So, the main portion of the meal is done. So just a little bit of that prep and planning ahead will really help, get meals on the table during the week.
I remember there was a Food Network show back, I don't know, years ago, maybe a decade ago. And I forget who did it, but her whole concept was cooking extra meat like on Sunday and coming up with 3 meals that you could have during the week. So, yeah, that's a great
I
idea.
think that might have been Sandy Richard, and she has, I believe, 6 children, and she has a few cookbooks actually. I think she
Mm,
calls it Cooking Forward, where she does make that large portion of whatever it is, right? It could be beans, it could be rice, it could be
yeah,
beef, and then just kind of repurposing it throughout the week. So, yeah, there are lots of good cookbooks or resources out there to help you figure out how to do that.
yeah, I think that's a great one. So let's talk about picky eaters because I certainly have a picky eater. At least
Mhm.
I think so. How do we know if our child's actually a picky eater versus just, typical children who often don't like trying something new?
Mhm. Um, well, about 50% of kids are picky eaters, and there's so many different definitions floating around from extreme picky eater to there's a new definition called pediatric feeding disorder now.
Oh,
Sometimes you
wow.
hear like ARFID thrown around. Um, so there's different levels of picky eating, absolutely. Most kids, especially as they're moving from, like baby into toddler and preschooler, it's definitely a normal developmental stage because they're not growing as much. So honestly, they're not as hungry as they were when they were little. They're learning to exert their independence, right? And there's very few things kids can control, especially
Mhm.
at that age of 2 or 3. It's like, whether they use the potty or whether they eat. So
Yep.
one way to
Yep.
get some attention and a bit of extra rise out of their parents. So that is a normal developmental stage. But there are lots of other reasons why kids are picky. And sometimes we miss them. Normal development, of course, it can be genetic. So, if you or your partner were picky, sometimes a child will be. But there's also things like oral motor issues. So if they have difficulty moving the food around in their mouth, sometimes it's the weakness of their tongue or their jaw. For some kids, they have actually difficulty breathing. I remember seeing this one child along with an occupational therapist, and she looked at his tonsils and said, they're really big. So there's reasons why kids might have difficulty breathing, such as enlarged tonsils. And in that case, it's really hard to do anything, including eat. And sensory is a big one too. So, we use all of our senses, 8 senses in eating. Eating is actually the most difficult sensory task we do. So people can be over responders or under responders in whether it's visual, like, looking at a food, auditory, touch, smell. So that can be really overwhelming for a lot of kids too. And then even like low iron, I can relate because my daughter was a picky eater for years. And I realized eventually that she had low iron, which makes sense because when they're not eating a lot, right? Especially picky eaters don't eat a lot of meat or sources of iron, and that can decrease growth and appetite. So that's kind of a poor cycle. So, if I see a child that's not eating a lot of iron as a picky eater, I usually recommend getting that tested and supplementing, which may in and of itself just improve their appetite.
That's interesting. I had no idea there were so many reasons that a child could be a picky eater. That's really fascinating. So what do we do about picky eaters? Like, what kinds of things can we try? What kinds of things should we avoid?
Mhm. Well, when it comes to picky eating, we just covered a lot of the kind of physical reasons, but a lot
Right.
of kids are picky. It's just behavioral, right?
Mhm.
So we can kind of change those patterns in our home. And I encourage parents to follow Ellen Satter's division of responsibility in feeding. Not sure if you heard of this, but I'm happy to explain it.
Yeah, I'm writing it down. So could
Okay.
you give us just a brief?
Yeah, so this is really important for feeding all kids, and it will help to prevent, even eating disorders. It helps with picky eating. It just helps raise your child with a healthy relationship with food, which I know we wanted to chat about as well. So
Mhm.
parents or caregivers have certain roles in feeding, and children have certain roles in eating. And if we can follow our roles and, trust our child to follow their roles, then, we'll have the outcomes that we're looking for in terms of raising a child that, is happy with the relationship with food in their body. So the parents or caregivers have 3 roles in feeding the child. And the first one is where the child eats.
Mhm.
So we want them to be in a supportive seat at the table. The supportive seat is something that often gets missed, especially if you have a younger kid that's getting up and down from the table all the time. So we need a footrest for them, backrest to make sure that it'll just make it so much easier for them to eat. And then part of the where is, at the table with the family when possible, which doesn't have to be every meal. I know it doesn't work with everyone's schedules, but especially as children grow into, adolescents, teenagers, we know that family meals a couple times a week not only get some better nutrition, but they do better in school. They have
Mhm.
healthier relationships. They're less likely to be involved in risky behaviors like drugs and alcohol. So there's so many benefits to just sitting down as a family.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the where, at the table with the family in a supportive seat as much as you can.
Mhm.
And then caregivers are also responsible for when the child eats. I find especially with picky eaters or small kids, the parents are kind of following them around all day just to get any bite in whenever they can. Or kids prefer to snack all day too, right?
Yeah,
Honestly.
mine does.
Yeah. And it just comes down to, at least for my kids, like they want something to do, right? They're bored. So they'll go to go to the pantry and eat. But if we can set a more structured meal and snack time versus snacking all day, then that will allow them to have a little bit of an appetite when they come to the table, and they'll be more likely to eat, right? If they're hungry. So if you can give, it varies per kid, but I'm just estimating about 2 hours or so between snack time, dinner time, and between then the kitchen is closed.
Okay.
They can have water. And that takes, of course, a couple days to kind of set that as a precedent, and you may get some
Yeah.
pushback, but eventually it'll lead to kids that eat better at the table. And then the third role for the parents is what the child is offered to eat.
Mhm.
And often the child controls this one because, they won't eat what's served. They want chicken fingers and fries, or they want their backup meal. The parent becomes a shorter to cook.
Mhm.
But if the kid knows that they can always get their favorite, then they're always going to get their favorite because it's tasty and it's easy to eat. And it's best just to provide the family meal to everybody. And of course, we don't want your kids to starve. So there can be 1 or 2 foods on the table that that they can eat.
Mhm.
Even if it's just, plain bread or cucumbers or rice. It's just the food that's offered to everybody. It's not special for them. It's part of the meal. But, if they get really anxious or nervous about trying new foods, then at least they have some option there that they can eat, so they don't go to bed hungry. But then you're not making them, their full separate meal, because that's too much work. That's too much work anyways, right? To be making multiple meals.
Yeah, so what do you think about, because I've done this in the past, so I do usually try to get something that she likes, or, I cave in and make her favorite meal, which I, do often. But in the past, I've tried, here's what's for dinner.
Mhm.
If you don't like it, you can go make yourself a ham and cheese sandwich. Is that an appropriate, response, or should I just stick with this is what's for dinner? I'm sorry if you don't like it. There's a couple things that you do like on the table.
And your daughter is 10, you said?
She'll be 10 in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah. So it starts to change a little bit once they become more independent and can kind of do things on their own, right?
Mhm.
Um, I would probably encourage you to get her involved more at the front end then of the
Mhm.
meal planning. So maybe she can pick out a meal or two during the week, right, that she wants added to the meal plan, or that she can help you make. As much as you can get them kind of involved in that, they'll take, more pride and ownership in that and be more likely to
Right.
eat food. And of course, they're gaining life skills.
Mhm.
So, it's okay occasionally to say, fine, you don't want to eat this, go make yourself a sandwich, because your daughter's old enough and capable of doing that. Um, a lot of younger kids wouldn't be, and that's fine. I think it's also
Right.
totally okay to say, no, this is what's for supper. You can eat, some bread if you're hungry, and snack is in whatever, 2 hours or an hour and a half. And it's okay
Okay.
to have a bedtime snack. I often get that question too. And it doesn't have
Mhm.
to be supper that they refuse that's reserved, right? It can
Mhm.
be boring. Like, snack doesn't have to be exciting, their favorite food either. It can be, 2 foods, peanut butter on toast, or,
Mhm.
cereal, or something simple, not exciting. So they're not necessarily like saving up for that snack,
Mhm.
right? But it's there if they need something to fill their tummy before bed.
Okay.
And then getting back to the division of responsibility. So we've covered the parents' roles of
Mhm.
what, when, and where. And then the child's only roles are if they eat or how much they eat, of the food you've served them at that meal and snack time. And this is really hard for parents to trust that their child knows how much to eat or will eat enough for them. It goes both ways, right? You see parents restricting a child if they think the child is eating too much, or maybe their child's living in a bigger body, or if their child is smaller, or they don't think their child's eating enough, they try and
Mhm.
force, pressure, bribe them into eating more. And
Mhm.
we know from plenty of research that actually both of those tactics backfire. So if we, restrict our kids, then they'll turn into binge eaters, because whenever they get the chance to make that decision to eat as much as they want, they'll kind of cram it all in and stop listening to
Mhm.
their appetite. And then the child that's forced to eat or pressured to eat more, no matter how that looks, it can look a variety of different ways.
Mhm.
Um, they get stressed out, right? And their cortisol and adrenaline is spiking, and they lose their appetite. So then they're not really listening to their appetite either, right? So we need to trust that, the child will eat as much as they need to grow, which the vast majority of them will, unless they have some underlying issue. And know that, especially for the younger ones, it's super common for their appetites to go up and down. It's not like adults where we eat pretty much the same amount every day, right? Maybe they're
Mhm.
teething or getting sick, or distracted because it's dinner and, everybody's around. We expect dinner to be like this big best meal of the day when most kids, especially like, the younger ones, don't eat dinner. And that's totally normal, right? They've probably gotten enough to eat throughout the rest of the day. So I don't have
Okay.
to.
So do we need to give kids that we think are picky eaters not getting enough nutrition, do we need to give them a multivitamin, a daily vitamin of some sort?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you'll hear varying opinions on that. Of course, it depends on the child's diet and what foods or food groups or nutrients they might not be getting. But overall, I think that a multivitamin, like a kid's multivitamin, is a decent choice. And one reason is because it helps the parents relax a little bit. If the kid didn't eat dinner, but at least they're getting their multivitamin, then the parents can feel slightly better because they know that their kid's getting a little bit of, vitamins and minerals that they need, at least from the vitamins. So I find it can help parents relax a little bit. And then I do see a lot of pick eaters, especially if they're really limited, low in things like iron. If they don't eat fish, they're probably not getting enough omega-3. Perhaps calcium, if they eat dairy or not, vitamin D. So, there's some of those key nutrients that it's difficult to get enough if you don't have a varied diet like many
Right.
children do not.
Yeah. So back to kind of the healthy relationship with food. So the structure that you were just talking about, the parent and child rules, is that the best way to help prevent disordered eating? Because I mean, my child, since she was 7, like I've seen her use food as a way to have control. Like when she's angry, she'll refuse to eat and drink anything.
Yeah.
So do you have any other suggestions on, I mean, that was when she was 7. And I'm like,
Yeah.
where is she even coming up with this idea to use food as a means of control? And
Right.
I struggled with disordered eating for, I mean, the past almost 30 years. So it obviously terrifies me to even think that she might go through that as well. So I want to do what's right and good and healthy for her.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you're, recognizing that and wanting something different for your child because I mean, of course, we are role models, right? So there are still lots of parents out there on diets or, cutting out certain foods, and the kids see that, right? But I think that division of responsibility is a big one. And we don't want to, restrict or pressure. We need to let them control how much they eat of the foods we choose, again, at those meal times. And then other things we can avoid are especially when you have a toddler, parents will often, console with food. If the
Mhm.
child's crying, they'll give them a cookie, which is basically teaching them emotional eating, right? And that food can
Right.
come. Rewarding with food,
Mhm.
or bribing with food, right? Like you can have dessert after you finish dinner. So all of those things are kind of setting those sweets up on a pedestal,
Mhm.
right? And kind of creating that unhealthy relationship with them or creating some emotions wrapped around them. And we really want to try and keep all food neutral, right? Like food is just food. I don't even like using the words treats or anything like that. It's just like a cookie, right? Because we
Okay.
don't want them to think their dinner is like this yucky thing they have to get through before they get this more desirable, cake or cookie that's now set up
Mhm.
on a pedestal because it's a bribe. So as much as we can take the emotions or the specialness out of any kind of food and just kind of try and make it all neutral, that'll help too.
Mhm. Okay. So let's talk about having a peaceful family dinner time,
Mhm.
and maybe using dinner time to build relationship with our family. How can we do that?
Yeah, I love this question because that's exactly what our goal is, right? We want dinner time to be this, or the table to be a nice place for people to come, every
Right.
member of the family to come. And I know that it's often not that, right? It's like a battle for both the parents and the kids, and everybody's stressed out when it comes time to the meal. So, it's not about the food that's offered. It doesn't have to be fancy. If it's macaroni with peas in it, fine. It's more about that bonding time and, taking that pressure off your child to eat. It doesn't matter who's eating what at the table. You don't focus on that. But for example, we used to go around and say like our highs and lows from the day. So everybody
Mhm.
gets a chance to talk and a listen, about their day. And there are lots of great websites too where you can go and print off like little questions. We also have this cup at home with cut out little questions so somebody can pull a question. It's things like, what superhero, which superhero would you want to
Mhm.
be? If you could have a special power, what would it be? So just kind of little conversation starters, right? And that's great to help, dinner be more fun and take the focus a little bit off of the food.
Yeah, my daughter loves doing that, having conversation cards or doing would you rathers, just anything to just spark conversation and get to know each other better and building that. I mean, we've been doing that for several years, most of the time when we sit down and have family dinner, because I don't allow phones at the table, so unless we're all going to use the phone to look something up or it's for everybody's benefit. Other than that, you can't have your phone at the table. So we have to find other ways to entertain ourselves. And she really has loved the conversation cards.
That's awesome. And another great tip, yeah, if you can avoid phones at the table, that's really
Yeah.
important. Of
Yeah, that's a big rule. She doesn't like it, but
course.
even when we go to restaurants, like, nope, no phones at the table. We're gonna sit down and conversate and enjoy ourselves. So
That's
she's gotten,
awesome.
yeah, she's gotten used to it. But I mean, everybody's got different rules about, some people have no phones in the car or what have you. And my rule is no phones at the table because that needs to be a time where we're really bonding and strengthening our family relationships, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I, have 3 kids myself, so I also struggle with limiting screen time for them. But, at least I know, when we're at the table at dinner, that's the guaranteed time for whatever 5, 10 minutes when nobody has their phone.
Absolutely. So where can we get more information about you and about what you do?
Sure. So my website is firststepnutrition.com. And from there, I do have a freebies tab. So I have a free webinar for parents who have kids that are picky eaters from age 1 to 5. And then I also have another category for kids age 6 to 13. So free videos
Oh,
kind of
great.
on different age groups, depending on your child's developmental level. And then I have a free 7-day meal plan on there as well, if meal planning is kind of an issue you struggle with.
Mhm.
And I'm on all the social medias as well. So my Instagram username is at First Step Net.
Awesome. I will definitely go check out your freebies.
Thank you.
I think they'll be really helpful. You can find me at ithurtstomom.com and at it hurts to mom on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I would love to hear from you via email at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. Hope everybody has a blessed and nutritious day. Thanks so much for coming on, Jennifer.
Thanks, Lauren.